San Francisco, 1890. Not the vibrant, tech-infused metropolis of today, but a city still shimmering with the phantom dust of the gold rush, yet also teeming with unseen horrors. Hidden within its exotic, bustling Chinatown, a war raged, its screams muffled by the din of everyday life. This wasn't some distant European conflict. It was a brutal, intimate struggle, fought street by narrow street. For decades, secret societies, known as tongs, turned narrow alleys into bloody battlefields. The Hip Sing, on Leong, Bing Kong, names whispered in fear, carved their empires from human misery. Opium, gambling, and the trafficking of young women were their currency, and violence their undeniable language. Prepare yourself to uncover the true, forgotten history of a conflict that burned Chinatown, where power truly meant more than life itself. Picture this. San Francisco, late 19th century, a city bursting at its seams with hopeful prospectors and desperate immigrants. Among them, waves of Chinese laborers arrived, lured by the promise of California's golden hills. They sought opportunity, a better life than the one they'd left behind. But what they often found instead was harsh xenophobia and crushing poverty. These newcomers, facing blatant discrimination and a legal system that often ignored them, were pushed into their own distinct communities, largely self-governing. Out of this isolation, benevolent societies, known as hui, began to form. They were meant to be havens, offering mutual aid, support, and protection in a hostile foreign land. A noble endeavor indeed. However, noble intentions, much like fresh fish on a hot day, can spoil quickly. In the vacuum of official protection, and under the crushing weight of systemic exclusion, these huis began to morph. The very forces meant to protect them from the outside world started to turn inward, growing teeth and claws, transforming into something far more sinister. The tongs. These weren't just social clubs anymore. They were powerful, often ruthless organizations that initially offered a semblance of order, but rapidly devolved into instruments of control and, more disturbingly, exploitation. They provided jobs, yes, but often jobs that blurred the lines of legality, laying the groundwork for a vast criminal enterprise. Three names would come to dominate this burgeoning underworld. The Hip Sing, known for its audacious aggression and willingness to challenge the established order. The On Leong, the largest and most entrenched rival, a Goliath among the shadows. And the Bing Kong, another significant player, often caught between these two warring giants. Each tong began its quiet ascent, consolidating power by providing services and demanding loyalty from the desperate Chinese populace. They built networks, collected fees, and started to control the flow of illicit goods and services within Chinatown's boundaries, slowly but surely laying the foundations for their clandestine empires. It was a slow burn, a gradual descent from community protectors to community predators. The lines blurred until they vanished entirely. What started as a shield against a prejudiced world became a cage, locking its inhabitants into a cycle of dependence and fear, all for the sake of power and illicit profit. Before we delve deeper into this gripping, yet tragic tale, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. You'll unlock more hidden histories and forgotten sagas that the textbooks often overlook. Also, hit that like button if you're finding this story compelling, and let us know in the comments which city or country you're tuning in from. The tongs, like any budding criminal enterprise, required a steady stream of revenue to fuel their ambitions and maintain their grip on power. They meticulously cultivated three immensely lucrative, albeit morally bankrupt, industries. These weren't just side hustles, they were the very pillars upon which their empires of fear and fortune were built. First, and perhaps most infamously, was the opium trade. Dark, smoky dens, hidden away in Chinatown's labyrinthine alleys, became havens for the desperate. Here, men and women found a fleeting, chemical escape from their harsh realities, only to be snared in the iron grip of addiction. The tongs supplied the drug, ran the dens, and profited immensely from human misery. Imagine the scene: the cloying, sweet smell of opium smoke, figures languidly reclining on bunks, their eyes glazed over, lost to the world. It was a business built on utter devastation, yet it generated staggering wealth, allowing the Tongs to expand their influence and buy off anyone who dared to interfere. Then there was gambling. For many, life in San Francisco was a relentless grind, punctuated by discrimination and poverty. Gambling offered a tantalizing, albeit false, hope of quick riches. From fan-tan to poker, every game was rigged, every bet controlled by the Tongs, who expertly milked the community's desperation for every last cent. These gambling houses weren't just places to wager, they were social hubs, community centers of a sort, where information flowed, loyalties were tested, and debts were collected with brutal efficiency. The Tongs ensured their profits were constant, their reach pervasive, and their control over this vice absolute. But the darkest, most profoundly disturbing revenue stream was the trafficking and enslavement of young women. These were the Mui Tsai, often girls, sometimes children, imported from China under false pretenses or sold by impoverished families. They arrived in San Francisco, only to be forced into brutal prostitution in Tong-controlled brothels. These unfortunate women were considered little more than property, a living commodity. Their bodies were exploited for profit, their spirits crushed under the weight of unspeakable cruelty. A Tong's prestige and wealth were often measured by the number of noivas it controlled, making them a focal point of intense, violent competition. A specific girl could ignite a full-blown war between rival factions. Think about that. A human being reduced to a pawn in a brutal game of territorial control and financial dominance. The fight over these Mui Tsai wasn't just about money. It was about pride, power, and the assertion of absolute authority over a rival. The Tongs understood human weakness profoundly. They preyed on addiction, capitalized on desperation, and most horrifyingly, exploited the utter vulnerability of women and children. This was the dark underbelly of San Francisco, a testament to what happens when desperation meets unchecked greed and utter disregard for human dignity. These three pillars, opium, gambling, and human trafficking, formed the unholy trinity that empowered the Tongs, granting them the financial muscle to not only survive, but to thrive, ultimately paving the way for the brutal conflict that would engulf Chinatown. Their profits were soaked in the tears and blood of the marginalized. With such colossal profits at stake, and a community ripe for exploitation, competition among the Tongs was not merely inevitable, it was a foregone conclusion. Every lucrative street corner, every bustling gambling den, every brothel housing desperate Mui Tsai became a potential flashpoint, a powder keg waiting for a spark. What would ignite such a volatile situation? It could be anything. A dispute over a specific brothel and its tragic inhabitants, a rival Tong daring to poach customers from another's opium den, or perhaps a brazen theft of a valuable opium shipment. These weren't just business squabbles. They were direct challenges to honor and territorial sovereignty. One common catalyst, often overlooked, was the taking of a rival Tong's noivas. Imagine the raw, almost primal insult of another group stealing your property, your source of income and prestige. Such an act was not merely economic. It was a profound act of disrespect, a public declaration of war against the offending faction. To enforce their will and protect their illicit assets, the Tongs employed a terrifying class of enforcers, the Hatchet Men. These were brutal, loyal, and utterly fearless individuals, often wielding axes or cleavers, ready to strike terror into the hearts of rivals or disobedient community members at a moment's notice. The Hatchet Men weren't just thugs. They were the Tongs' personal justice system, their grim arbiters of order. Their tactics were simple yet brutally effective. Intimidation, ambushes in dark alleys, and swift public assassinations. Their very presence was a chilling reminder of who truly held power in Chinatown. Their loyalty was absolute, often earned through a complex web of familial ties, sworn oaths, and sheer fear. These men operated under a code of brutal efficiency, their actions serving as dire warnings to anyone considering defying Tong authority, or, worse yet, challenging their rivals. They were ghosts in the night, leaving behind only whispers and blood. The first confrontations were likely veiled, swift acts of violence. A sudden, silent stabbing in a busy market. A beatdown witnessed only by shadows. But as the stakes grew higher, and pride became inextricably linked to profit, these sporadic skirmishes began to escalate, bleeding into the open. Perhaps it was a bold daylight shooting in a crowded street, designed to send a clear message. Or an improvised explosive thrown into a rival establishment, its detonation echoing through the tightly packed tenements. These acts moved the conflict from whispered threats to undeniable, terrifying declarations of open warfare. The community, caught in the middle, could only watch in horror as their supposed protectors transformed into warring factions, their disputes now threatening to consume everyone. The simmering tensions, once contained, had finally boiled over, splashing hot, corrosive acid onto the fabric of daily life in Chinatown. The era of sporadic violence was over. The stage was now set for an all-out bloodbath, a period of unrelenting terror that would come to define the Tong Wars. The initial sparks had caught fire, and the entire district was about to become an inferno. Once ignited, the Tong Wars quickly escalated into a period of unimaginable terror. The notion of a Cold War was obliterated. Now it was open season. The sound of gunfire, once a shocking anomaly, became an all-too-familiar, chilling soundtrack to daily life in Chinatown, a constant reminder of the violence lurking just around the corner. Shootings weren't confined to dark alleys anymore. They burst forth in crowded markets, spilled out from gambling dens, and erupted near unsuspecting tea houses. Improvised explosives, crude yet deadly, were thrown into rival businesses, often causing devastating fires that spread rapidly through the wooden structures of the district. Imagine trying to run a laundromat or sell your wares while constantly scanning the street for suspicious figures, knowing that a stray bullet or a vengeful hatchet could end your life at any moment. This wasn't some distant battlefield. It was happening right outside your front door, every single day. Chinatown became a city under siege, not from an external enemy, but from within. Residents lived under a cloud of pervasive fear, their lives dictated by the ever-present threat of violence. The simplest errands became fraught with danger. A walk to the market could easily turn into an unwitting journey through a war zone. Business owners struggled immensely. Who would risk their life to patronize a shop when a shootout could break out at any given second? The economic lifeblood of the community began to clot, strangled by the relentless grip of fear and the absolute chaos that reigned supreme. Children played, if they played at all, under the watchful, anxious eyes of parents, who knew that even the innocence of youth offered no protection from the indiscriminate wrath of warring tongs. The joy and vibrancy that once characterized the district were slowly suffocated by an insidious, all-consuming dread. And where was the law, you might ask? The San Francisco police force was notoriously ineffective, often seen as either corrupt, entirely uninterested, or simply incapable of comprehending the intricate, often veiled dynamics of the Tong Wars. They were outsiders, viewing the conflict with a mix of disdain and bewilderment. Police raids, when they occurred, were often perfunctory, sweeping up low-level operators while the true architects of the violence remained untouchable, thanks to bribes or political connections. This left the Chinese community feeling utterly abandoned, forced to navigate the treacherous waters of the Tong Wars on their own. The perceived impotence of the authorities only further emboldened the Tongs, giving them free rein to continue their bloody feuds. There was no outside force to fear, no true deterrent to their escalating violence, creating a power vacuum that they were only too happy to fill with their own brand of brutal justice. This period was a dark stain on San Francisco's history, a stark reminder of what happens when a community is marginalized, exploited, and ultimately left to fend for itself against ruthless forces. The chaos in Chinatown wasn't just a series of violent incidents. It was a devastating systemic failure. The Tong Wars were rarely a straightforward, two-sided conflict. It was more like a macabre, ever-shifting dance of death. Alliances were forged and shattered with a fluidity that made the conflict incredibly unpredictable, adding another layer of terror to the lives of Chinatown's residents. The Hipsing, with their aggressive expansionist policies, often found themselves clashing head-on with the established might of the Leong. But the Bingkong, a significant third player, complicated matters immensely, often playing kingmaker, or simply seizing opportunities from the chaos created by the other two. Imagine the strategic calculations. Should the Bingkong ally with the Hipsing to weaken the powerful on Leong, only to risk becoming the Hipsing's next target. Or perhaps side with the on Leong to crush the Hipsing, securing their own piece of the pie. This constant maneuvering kept everyone on edge. These alliances were fragile, built on momentary convenience and the pursuit of immediate gain, rather than any lasting loyalty. A shared enemy today could become a sworn rival tomorrow, with the flip of a dime or the snatching of a lucrative territory. Treachery was not an exception, it was the expectation. While specific epic battles might not be recorded with the romantic flair of European wars, there were undoubtedly periods of intense, concentrated violence. Perhaps the New Year's War, an often feared time when grievances boiled over amid celebrations, leading to widespread fatalities and property destruction. During these peaks, Chinatown essentially became a no-man's land. Businesses would shut down, streets would empty, and residents would barricade themselves indoors, hoping to avoid being caught in the crossfire of a hatchet attack or a volley of bullets from rival factions. Oddly enough, there were repeated attempts at brokering peace. Community leaders, exhausted by the bloodshed, and even some concerned outsiders tried to mediate. These peace conferences were often grand affairs, with solemn promises made, handshakes exchanged, and temporary truces declared. But time and again, these efforts crumbled. The immense profits derived from opium, gambling, and human trafficking, coupled with the deeply ingrained pride and thirst for dominance among the Tong leaders, proved to be far more powerful than any plea for reason or calls for peace. Each failed peace attempt only deepened the cynicism and despair within the community. It solidified the grim reality that the Tongs, despite their occasional posturing, had no real interest in ending a conflict that, while costly, also maintained their iron grip on power and wealth. The dance of death continued, punctuated by moments of false hope, only to descend once more into the familiar rhythm of violence. The instability of alliances ensured that no one was ever truly safe, and the war, in its unpredictable ebb and flow, became an almost permanent fixture of Chinatown life. Then, on April 18th, 1906, something truly cataclysmic happened. The Great San Francisco earthquake struck, followed by devastating fires that raged for days. This wasn't just another localized disaster. It was an apocalyptic event that leveled vast swathes of the city, including, perhaps ironically, much of Chinatown. The earthquake and subsequent inferno were indiscriminate. They ripped through the opium dens, toppled the gambling houses, and incinerated the brothels, destroying the very infrastructure upon which the Tongs had built their illicit empires. Their bases of operation, their sources of power, were quite literally reduced to ash. This wasn't a strategic defeat for any Tong. It was a cosmic reset button. The overwhelming scale of the destruction forced a complete cessation of hostilities, as sheer survival and the need for shelter became the immediate, overriding priorities for everyone, Tong member or not. In the chaotic, smoky aftermath, a unique opportunity arose. Reform-minded Chinese community leaders, alongside progressive American reformers, saw a chance to rebuild Chinatown, not just physically, but morally and socially. This was their moment to break free from the shackles of the Tongs. New building codes were established, creating a more modern, safer infrastructure. Crucially, increased police presence and a renewed, more focused effort from law enforcement put immense pressure on the fragmented Tong leadership, making it significantly harder for them to resume their old ways. The earthquake, in a grim twist of fate, had done what years of police indifference and community efforts could not. It severely crippled the Tongs' ability to operate. Their financial networks were shattered, their control over the human trafficking reduced, and their power base eroded. While the violence dramatically decreased after 1906, it would be a mistake to assume the Tongs vanished entirely. They didn't. Instead, their influence over organized crime and the Chinese community was irrevocably broken, fragmented into smaller, less formidable entities. The vibrant, resilient spirit of Chinatown gradually re-emerged, no longer completely overshadowed by the terror of the Tong Wars. New businesses rose from the ashes, and a concerted effort was made to shed the district's notorious reputation, pushing it towards a brighter future. Yet, the legacy of those brutal decades lingered. The memory of the Hatchet Men, the desperate cries of the Mui Tsai, and the pervasive fear remained etched in the collective consciousness. It was a stark reminder of the cost of neglect, discrimination, and unchecked power. The Tong Wars, a dark chapter born of desperation and culminating in destruction, stand as a testament to both human cruelty and the remarkable resilience of a community. Chinatown rebuilt, but the echoes of its fiery past still whisper through its crowded streets. The Tong Wars of San Francisco represent one of the most brutal and often overlooked chapters in American history. It was a harrowing testament to the desperation born from exclusion, the ravenous maw of exploitation, and the relentless, intoxicating allure of unbridled power. Behind the seemingly exotic facades of Chinatown, a chilling reality unfolded. Women, often mere girls, were cruelly enslaved, their lives deemed expendable commodities. Men were cut down in broad daylight, their futures extinguished for a few illicit dollars or a matter of pride. An entire community, vibrant and resilient, lived for decades under a suffocating shroud of terror, caught between the brutal Tongs and a law enforcement system that either couldn't or wouldn't protect them. It was a living nightmare, unfolding in the heart of a supposedly civilized city. This isn't just a grim tale of gang violence. It's a profound, uncomfortable reflection on the systemic consequences of social exclusion and rampant greed. It underscores the unimaginable price paid when the most vulnerable among us are left unprotected, their dignity and safety sacrificed at the altar of profit. Even today, if you walk through the bustling streets of San Francisco's Chinatown, you might, if you listen closely enough, feel the faint echoes of that tumultuous era. It's a somber reminder that the most violent wars aren't always fought on grand, open battlefields, but sometimes in the cramped, shadowy alleys of human ambition and despair. Thank you for joining us on this journey into such a dark, compelling piece of history. What are your thoughts on the resilience of the community or the sheer horror of the Mui Tsai trade? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this story impactful, please give us a like and don't forget to subscribe for more untold historical sagas. We'll see you in the next video.